My name is Kris Gethin, and what I aim to bring to you is inspiration, motivation from clients, everything that will allow you to evolve as a human being. Hello everybody, Kris Gethin here, and welcome to another episode of the Kris Gethin podcast. Thank you very much for joining me. If you do like what you're hearing from the Kris Gethin podcast, please do like, share it with others who you feel would benefit from this, and of course subscribe. It is you that keeps the lights on, and we really appreciate you. Today I have a phenomenal guest. Sal Stefano is the author of this book, The Resistance Training Revolution, that's just come out, and I've just finished reading it, and it's a phenomenal read. It really is. Remember, there's a lot of good books out there though but you have to apply them should you want to see the results, and I guarantee you will see great results if you apply the knowledge that Sal delivers. Sal has got an amazing background. However, if I read in the back of the book here, he's being very humble. It says here that he's a personal trainer, and he has been a personal trainer for many years, about 20 years I think, and he's the co-founder of Mind Pump Media and the co-host of Mind Pump. Mind Pump is a phenomenal podcast, so check them out, and he's dedicated to providing truthful fitness and health information. There's a few other things that he hasn't mentioned in here, like he has scaled large franchise gyms in the past when he's worked for them. But he's a phenomenal guy. We'll tuck into this book a little bit, but we'll ask him a lot of questions in regards to fat burning. So without further ado, let's check it out. All right, Sal, how's it going, brother? Thank you for coming on, mate.
Pretty good. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Of course. Now, I'm a huge fan of what I can see in the background there, the Mind Pump podcast. What you guys have been doing over the years is absolutely phenomenal. You've had quite a few of my friends on as guests. But, the one thing that I want to talk about specifically today that you are definitely an expert in, you're an expert in a lot of things. However, fat loss is the one thing that I want to talk about today, because as we can see with society, it's literally growing. I've just spent 6 weeks in Europe, and I left Wales in the 90s. But every time I go back, I see people tend to get bigger and bigger. However, it's nothing in comparison to what I see in the US. You know what it's like. You come back to any airport in the US, and you don't even need to know that you're in the US to actually see that you're here, because people have a big problem. What do you feel is the biggest issue that we're dealing here in the US in comparison to countries like the UK, for instance?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. And what you're saying about obesity is, it can't be overstated. This is really, it's a tsunami of a problem that literally threatens to bankrupt modern societies. It contributes to so many different health issues. It reduces productivity, innovation. It contributes to mental illness. So it really can't be overstated in terms of, its impact. Now, obesity is a very visible effect of how our changing lifestyle is affecting us. And obesity itself contributes to some of these health issues. But even in the non-obese, because you still see a sizable minority, it's still a minority, but it's still a sizable minority of people who may not have visible, obesity. But now we're seeing rising rates of chronic illnesses, heart disease and diabetes, for example, which are connected to obesity. But like I said, there's a sizable minority of people who aren't obese who get those issues as well. So what's the U.S. doing? Why do we seem to be, I guess, leading the charge with obesity? Well, we here in the U.S., we do a great job of exporting our media and exporting some of the way that we live. And what we're seeing is just kind of this, the effects of that. So the largest contributor, in my opinion, to obesity is the way that we consume food, or the types of foods that we consume. Studies will show that trying to burn more calories through activity, although that does contribute to better health, isn't really going to place a big dent in the obesity issue. It really has a lot more to do with kind of what we eat. And if you look at the prevalence of heavily processed foods in the standard American diet, you can kind of match that with a chart of the growing rate of obesity. The obesity epidemic really started to kind of take hold in the 80s, I would say. That's when people really started to become aware of it. Although heart disease was identified as an issue before that, it really started to take off sometime in the 80s. And that's when you start to see heavily processed foods make more and more of our diet. Now, Europe took a little longer to follow, primarily because European countries are older. They have cultures of food that are older than here in the US, and it took longer for them to change their habits. For example, if you look at the European countries, Italy and France followed the obesity epidemic, but did so even slower than countries like the UK, for example. Probably because my speculation is that, Italy and France have a really, really deep, rich history and culture around food, and they look at food and view foods a particular way. So they were much more resistant to changing how they eat and how they cook and whatnot. Like I remember as a kid going to Italy. My family's from Italy. I remember, one of the first McDonald's popping up in Sicily, where my family's from, and it was kind of a big deal. Well, now they're all over the place down there, and lots of fast food places. So heavily processed foods are one of the biggest contributors. Now, why is that? We actually have some pretty good studies now that kind of tell us what's going on. Heavily processed foods are engineered to be hyper palatable, and there's most of the money that goes into these foods goes into creating them or inventing ways of making these foods so palatable that they're irresistible. Obviously, they could sell more food this way, and we love them because of it. And studies now show that on average, a person who consumes lots of heavily processed foods will eat about 500 to 600 more calories a day just from doing so. They've actually done some studies where, one of the challenges with diet studies is that they tend to be self-reported. So people will come in and report their diet and tell you what they've eaten, and then we'll kind of deduce what's going on based off of that. The problem with that is that self-reporting is notoriously inaccurate. If you've ever trained or coached people in fitness for longer than a year, you know how off people can be with trying to estimate their calories or what they've eaten or whatever. So they're just kind of notoriously inaccurate. Well, what they did with these studies was pretty awesome, because they actually took people and put them in controlled environments. And they took groups and they said, okay, this group over here, you're in this room, we're going to observe you. All the food in this room is heavily processed. And then they took another group and they said, okay, we're going to observe you, and all the food in here is whole and natural. And we're just going to watch you and just eat like you normally do. And they actually controlled for macro ratios as well. So it's not like this was high carb, this was low carb, high fat, low fat. It was pretty similar. And they observed them for a while. And then what they did was they took those two groups and switched rooms. So they took this group, moved them over here, took this group, moved them over here. And they've done several of these studies, and they find that it's about 5 to 600 more calories that we will consume with heavily processed foods. That's a big difference. 500 or 600 more calories a day is pounds and pounds and pounds of body fat, and dramatically, increased risks of chronic diseases. We know that, for example, a high sugar diet is not nearly as damaging to the body if it's a low calorie diet. But as soon as the calories go up real high, then that high sugar diet now becomes just exponentially worse for you. So no, not to oversimplify it, because I think it's a faceted problem. But one of the biggest problems is that just we consume, the last study I read was something like the average American's diet, something like 70 to 80% heavily processed, versus 70 years ago where it was 5 or 10% heavily processed. So that's made the biggest impact, and Europe just kind of followed suit. They didn't implement these foods nearly as quickly as we did, but we started exporting them, and before you know it, they start consuming them, and now they're starting to follow suit. And then you combine that with lack of activity, primarily lack of muscle strength, and muscle loss is a huge contributor to some of our chronic health issues. And it also plays a role in obesity. So when you add all that up, I mean, it's inevitable. How do we reverse it? We're going to have to change. We're going to have to fundamentally change the ways that we eat food and how we approach activity, or even just our lifestyle. So this is a very challenging issue.
Yeah, it's funny that you should say it in regards to the processing of food, because if I think back like 2 generations ago, it was there was a lot of scarcity. If I think back to, World War II, my grandmother would, their family would share a goat with the neighbors, for
Yeah.
instance. And a lot of the food that they'd use, and it's still, my grandparents would eat a lot of lard, a lot of fats. Maybe it's a lot of lamb, for instance, coming from Wales. So there's a lot of fats there. However, none of this is processed. They could at least pronounce the ingredients so their body recognizes them. Now food is a little bit more convenient. There's no scarcity. It's overabundance. And they can't pronounce half of these ingredients, and they're just causing these bodies to be inflamed. And one thing that I've noticed, you're in San Jose, correct?
Yes.
You think of the cities over here in the US, they're not really designed for pedestrians. You can't go around you think in Italy or in the UK, for instance, you can walk around a lot of those cities. So there's a lot of inactivity here, I'd say, that's probably a contributing factor as well. And then you've got places like Sardinia over there where food is more celebrated. And that's one of the blue zones where they say the connection and the convenience, I'd say, as opposed to the inconvenience of eating food is a lot more celebrated.
Yes.
Now, you touched on one thing in regards to muscle, people losing muscle. Now, people think of muscle building as usually reserved specifically for people that are going to be oiled up in their posing pants on stage, where, like in your book that I'd like to talk about a little bit here that I've read, which is a great book, by the way, The Resistance Training Revolution, the no cardio way to burn fat and age-proof your body in only 60 minutes a week. Now, are you suggesting that weight training should be encouraged to absolutely everybody in order for them to better maintain or at least burn fat or maintain their body composition as it is, as opposed to a lot of people going out there and just doing cardio and hours of cardio thinking that is going to be the sure way to burn fat?
Yeah, 100%. So I'm going to get to that, but I want to touch on a couple things, and then let's get to the strength training and muscle building, because I think that's such an important part of this conversation. So just to illustrate the whole processed food conversation a little further, if I were to give you or anybody, 5 or 6 boiled plain potatoes, so just a potato boiled, nothing on it, no salt, no butter, and I said, hey, eat this in an hour, most people wouldn't be able to do it, right? After about 2 or 3 of them, they'd gag. It would be palate fatigue would kick in, and they wouldn't be able to finish it. But if I gave you a family-sized bag of potato chips, which contains about 5 potatoes, most of us could eat those in an hour. So the heavily processed foods are engineered to be palatable and to overcome these natural systems of satiety. So it's not necessarily the abundance, because our bodies are already wired to not overconsume. Overconsuming is bad, just like underconsuming is. So it's not like we're these eating machines where if there's food in front of us, we're just going to eat it all, no matter what. We also have palate fatigue that'll kick in. I mean, you put a steak and some vegetables and plain potatoes in front of someone, they're going to eat so much. You tell them, eat until you're satisfied. They'll eat so much. But if you take those foods and you turn them into processed versions of themselves, where scientists have gone in and engineered them, and they do everything from taste, smell, the mouth feel, the crunch, like all these different and much more, right? You put that all in there, and like I said, the studies show 500 to 600 more calories before that palate fatigue kicks in. The other thing I want to touch on is you mentioned cities. Yeah, most of the cities in Europe were designed before cars were invented. So if you go to even here, if you go to an old city in the US like San Francisco or New York, having a car is very inconvenient because the cities were designed before those were invented. Now, many of our cities here in the US are invented after the car. So you have suburbs, and then you have areas of commerce and work and whatever. So it's like you have to have a car. You're not going to move much. And activity definitely contributes to better health. So I'm glad you brought that up. All right, let's talk about muscle. Why is that such an important thing, and why should everybody strength train? Muscle is incredibly protective when it comes to your health, massively so. It's one of the most protective organs or tissues of the body. I'll give you an example. Okay. One of the components of our chronic health issues in modern societies has to do with insulin resistance. Okay. Insulin resistance contributes to cardiovascular disease, contributes to dementia and Alzheimer's. In fact, some researchers will call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. It contributes to obesity. And it contributes to mood changes and swings and personality issues, because as your body becomes resistant to insulin, a lot of things start operating in ways that are not very optimal. And the worse it gets, the worse your health gets. One of the easiest ways to increase your insulin sensitivity is to simply build muscle. I mean, they have studies on obese individuals. And I don't mean like normal obese. I mean, severely obese individuals, 80, 100 pounds overweight. And they'll just have them build a little muscle, not lose any body fat. They'll have them gain a few pounds of muscle. And we see significant improvements in insulin sensitivity, more so than if they lost a bunch of weight. How is that possible? Well, muscle is extremely insulin sensitive. First off, it's one of the ways your body stores glycogen. What's glycogen? Well, this is an energy that is created from carbohydrates and sugars. Now, your body primarily stores it in your liver, but it also uses muscle to store glycogen. Well, the more muscle you have, the higher your capacity is to store sugars and carbohydrates. Muscle is, we know that anabolic, right? Anabolism contributes to muscle building. Well, insulin is a very anabolic hormone. In fact, it's the most anabolic hormone, even more so than testosterone. A lot of people don't know that. Well, when you build a little muscle, it's just you got more receptors for insulin. Your body can receive it more. It can utilize it more effectively. So just having a little bit more muscle starts to bulletproof you against the insulin, desensitizing effects of our modern lifestyle. So that's one right there. Two, more muscle, or the process of building muscle. Okay, because this is there's more to it than just having more muscle. The process of building muscle, the things that go into it, the signaling that goes into telling your body, hey, we need to be stronger. Hey, we need to be more muscle. What this does is this takes your metabolic rate. Okay, so let's say this is your range of how many calories you could burn with your current lean body mass. So we're not even talking about building more muscle just yet, but your current lean body mass. If we tell the body that we need muscle, simply telling the body we need more muscle will move your body more towards the direction of burning more calories and away from the direction of saving or storing more calories. In other words, your body can become more or less efficient with calories. In other words, you can speed up your metabolism. Now, if you add muscle on top of that, well, now you've got a faster metabolism. Well, why is that important? Well, if I could snap my fingers right now and make everybody's metabolism 800 calories faster or burn 800 more calories just all the time. So if I could just do that, boom, everybody burns 800 more calories a day, I would solve a large piece of the obesity epidemic, because you would burn off the calories that you consume. Earlier, I said that, a high sugar diet, I use that as an example, is not nearly as damaging when your calories are low versus when they're high. The context of low or high has to do with how many calories you're burning. A low calorie diet for me just simply means I'm burning as many or fewer calories. I'm burning as many or more calories than I'm consuming. In other words, if I eat 3,000 calories a day and my body burns 3,000 or 3,500 calories, if my diet is comprised of a lot of sugar, if it's comprised of a lot of maybe inflammatory fats, the damage that those things cause in my body is greatly negated. Not 100%, but dramatically so. This is why you'll often get scientists who will debate, health experts or fitness experts, I should say, over the detrimental effects of sugar, because they'll bring up a study and say, oh, well, look, here's a study that shows that when this person ate a low calorie diet, even though it was high in sugar, their cholesterol improved, their triglycerides improved, their inflammatory markers dropped. Therefore, sugar isn't bad for you. They'll make those conclusions. Well, it's because, like I said, if you're burning off the calories, a lot of those effects are negated. Not all of them, because there's much more that goes into it. For example, even if you consume a low calorie diet in comparison to how many you're burning and it's high sugar, you're still going to have behavioral effects. You're still going to feel differently. And that definitely can affect how things work later on. So I don't want to gloss over that. Nonetheless, if you speed up your metabolism, you solve a lot of issues. Building muscle is the most effective way to do that. You know what's a not effective way to do that? Trying to burn calories manually. That's a very ineffective way of trying to fix this problem. That requires a lot of manual work. That means I have to get up and move. Me getting up to try to burn 300 calories would require an hour and a half of vigorous activity. Me teaching my body or encouraging my body to burn 300 more calories a day through the process of building muscle, well, that's a lot easier. First off, and you know this because you're a fitness expert, working out to build muscle doesn't require a ton of time, especially if you're the average person. I mean, I could take the average person off the street and I could give them 2, 45-minute well-programmed workouts a week, and they're going to build some strength and some muscle. And we've now built that protective effect. Now, if I took those 2 45 minutes workouts and I just said, hey, let's burn as many calories as you can in 45 minutes, it would be negligible. I'd burn, okay, maybe 200 more calories in those 45-minute workouts, so 400 calories over the course of a week. That's nothing. That's like a couple sodas for the whole week. I barely did anything. Versus, let's take these workouts, let's send the signal to build muscle, let's send the signal to build strength, therefore speeding up the metabolism, therefore turning your body into a calorie burning machine. And now you're burning an extra couple hundred calories every day on your own. A much more sustainable approach. And then there's another part to this, which is the mobility aspect of this. This can't be overstated. This is a big problem now. Okay. If you look at people as they age, a lot of their health issues get significantly worse when they start to lose mobility. There's a saying, I used to train a lot of doctors here in the States when I was a personal trainer. I had a wellness studio next to a hospital. Towards the end of my career, I built a bit of a reputation, and I started getting all these doctors and surgeons that wanted to train with me. And I remember they used to say this one saying to me that I thought was fascinating. They would say, when it comes to, advanced age population, we have a saying here in the hospital, and that's you break your hip and then you die of pneumonia. And if you have anybody in your family that's older, you've seen this. It's like, grandma, yeah, her health was kind of slowly declining, but then she fell and broke her leg. And then it was a rapid decline from that loss of movement and mobility. Well, this happens because people lose strength, loss of balance, loss of mobility, weak bones. This is directly the result of just losing strength. I mean, if I made you 90% weaker right now, your chances of falling and breaking something would dramatically increase. So there's that as well. And this can't be overstated. We're now seeing bone loss in people as young as in their late 20s and early 30s, which is pretty wild. There was a study they recently did here where they tested the grip strength. Grip strength is a really good indicator of overall body strength. So it's an easy way, not 100% accurate, of course, but if you test someone's grip, you could generally see if their whole body is strong or weak or what's going on. They did a study where they tested college-aged males' grip strength. This was done, I want to say, maybe 8 years ago. And they found that college-aged males today have the grip strength that 65-year-olds had in the 1980s. Okay, that's how much weaker we've become today. Oh, one more thing that I want to touch on. It's all the rage right now, or it's starting to become all the rage to look at our hormones, right? These hormone replacement facilities. We hear about testosterone declining. This has been observed now for, 5 decades at least. Lots of reasons why they're speculating men's testosterone levels are declining. Fertility rates are declining. You're starting to see lots of imbalances with women as well. Estrogen and progesterone. We talked about insulin. People will inject themselves with growth hormone as they get older to kind of feel better. And well, one of the most effective ways, actually, if not the most effective way to positively influence your hormones is to simply tell your body and eat in a way to build muscle. Why is that? Well, the process of building muscle, it's an anabolic, it's what's known as an anabolic process. And your body, in order to build muscle, has to organize its hormones in a way to do so. Your body has a tough time building muscle, for example, as a man with low testosterone. If you have low testosterone, try building muscle. It's very difficult. But if you send the signal to build muscle, what your body first does is it recognizes the signal. It says, okay, we need more strength. We need more muscle. The hormones are the signaling, messengers of the body, if you will. It's how it communicates, one way at least. So the body says, okay, let's raise testosterone. Okay, let's improve insulin sensitivity. All right, let's raise growth hormone a little bit. Let's balance out cortisol, because too much cortisol can kind of eat away at muscle. In women, you'll see a lot of this as well, and you'll see a balancing of estrogen and progesterone. So the process of building muscle is a very effective way of organizing hormones to make them appear more youthful. It's like a youthful hormone profile. Like when you go through puberty, your body's trying to build muscle naturally and kind of, make you a stronger version of yourself. That's what your body will do, right? This is what we kind of experience when we're in our youth. And this is what tends to decline as we get older. Well, when you tell your body to build muscle, you start to see all this. And if you tell your body to lose muscle, you'll see the opposite. You'll see that your body will organize its hormones in a way to make muscle loss much easier. So those are some of the reasons why strength training is something that we need to encourage to everyone. And the cool thing is we're now finally, because those of us in fitness have known this for a long time. Like if you hire a trainer, an experienced trainer, their primary method that they'll train their clients is through strength training. You hire a trainer who's been doing it for 10 years and you tell them fat loss, that's my goal. Or you tell them mobility or health or, I hurt. Their primary tool that they use is strength training. You see this in rehab as well. Physical therapists will use strength training as their primary method. So we've known this for a long time, but the medical community has taken a long time to follow, to have the studies to support this, probably because it's more difficult to study strength training. It's easy to put a mouse on a hamster wheel. It's hard to get a mouse to lift weights. And strength training has been kind of relegated to strength sports and athletes. So we had a lot of studies on that, but we didn't have, 20 years ago, try finding a study on strength training and heart health, right? Didn't exist. Or strength training and dementia, strength training and longevity, right? They don't exist. So the recommendations never included strength training. Well, now we have studies. We actually have studies that show that strength training is superior, for example, for cancer prevention. So building muscle reduces your risk of cancer by a quarter, 25%. No other form of exercise comes close, right? Heart health, it's at least as effective at improving heart health and cardiovascular health as cardiovascular training, which actually has the word cardio in it, cardiovascular training. So it's at least as effective when you compare head to head. When it comes to brain health, it's the most effective. There was a study out of Sydney, Australia that showed that strength training so far is the only non-medical intervention that's been shown to slow down, or maybe even they actually speculated this in the study because it started trending in this direction, halt the progression of the beta amyloid plaques that we know are strongly connected to Alzheimer's, probably through that insulin sensitizing effect. That was a speculation, but there may be another mechanism. Nonetheless, we now have studies showing, thankfully, that strength training is just this incredible form of exercise for health and longevity. And I think that, and the reason why I titled the book, The Resistance Training Revolution, I think this revolution is going to happen anyway, whether this book came out or not. I think I just wanted to make sure that I got in on it and said, hey, look, here's the deal. Here's what we know. Here's what I've seen. Let's make this happen a little faster. But the studies are supporting it. And I think this is going to be common medical practice. I think in the next 10 to 15 years, you go to the doctor and they see that your health isn't so good. They do your blood work. And I think that they're going to say, hey, let's start you off with once a week of strength training, because we see that the time being spent doing it, the return is just so great.
Now, while we can't imagine drinking coffee loaded with toxic chemicals, we unknowingly use skincare products that could be having a negative effect on our health as well. So things such as parabens, phthalates, silicone, carcinogens can disrupt our endocrine system and have been known to cause various forms of cancer. So it's a murky world to navigate as it is. So why add skincare products to the list that can cause you harm? So make sure that you are checking each and every label to ensure that the words non-toxic are written all over it. And that's definitely what you're going to find with visual chemistry skin labels. And their skincare products are gluten-free, cruelty-free, all vegan, paraben-free, sulfate-free, silicone-free, talc-free, carcinogen-free, and they're eco-friendly. And I've been using this line for many, many years, and I often get, I get compliments to say that I look a lot younger than 47 years old. So I'm going to continue to use them. So your skin deserves the best, and shop for the products that I use by looking for the G stack on the visual Chemistry Skin website. So that's exactly what I use every single day. The mask I'll use on a weekly basis, but everything else I use every day. So use the code GETHIN20, that's GETHIN 20, to save 20%.
Yeah, and we know over the past couple of years when everybody was shut down, there was more people searching online for some sort of workout, and they don't have to feel so intimidated like some people do going to the gym now. Because in your book there, you've obviously got some dumbbell only workouts, or you got the home workouts. So there's never really an excuse to justify your complacency now. And let's look at it. It doesn't really take that much effort. Yes, people become students of learning, but that application is literally just 2 or 3 hours a week. Of course, they need to look after their nutritional protocol during the rest of the time with good preparation and with possibly the intermittent fasting that you suggested as well, that they can do this. And let's just swap gears a little bit onto the nutritional aspect, where we come from very similar backgrounds. I was a personal trainer for many years, got my own facility, personal training studio, and I was competing in bodybuilding, doing the 6 meals a day. But then I had a colonoscopy where I had to fast. And then all of a sudden I'm like, you know what, now I've fasted for a while, let me give this a go. And I really did enjoy the effects from it because, as a bodybuilder, we're always hitting our mTOR, never really our AMPK. And it just gave the body a bit of a rest, and inflammatory markers seem to come down. So is this something that you suggest to every single one of your clients? And can you touch on intermittent fasting that you suggest as in the book?
Yeah, it needs to be appropriate. Okay, so fasting, when appropriate, can be a wonderful behavioral method that can help with someone detaching from some behaviors they have around food that are not helpful. So you use yourself as an example, being a bodybuilder. I love that example because that's such a great extreme illustration of how fasting can benefit you behaviorally. Same thing, right? When I started working out, and I never competed, but my goal was always to build as much muscle as possible. So I ate every 2 hours, right? So it's 7 meals a day on the clock. And I was afraid if I missed a meal that I would, lose 15 pounds of muscle. So I was religious about it. Well, when I fasted for the first time, I broke those chains, right? So I was able to go without food and realize that the world wasn't going to end. And I was able to examine my poor relationship to it, right? How can this help someone else who's maybe not in that situation? Well, we eat for a lot of reasons. One of them is we're hungry, although that's, believe it or not, probably down the totem pole of reasons why we eat in modern societies. Most people really never experience true hunger anymore. It takes like 24, 48 hours for people without food to actually feel that. And most people don't go any longer than 4 or 6 hours, right? Without food. So most people eat for reasons like boredom, irritability, depression, happiness. They're celebrating, connecting, or just the hedonistic, value of food. It's enjoyable to eat things that taste really good. So food's got, and your evidence, look, for anybody who's listening to me, who's maybe getting a little confused with this, just look at food, okay? Food is culture. There are foods that are attached to breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and to weddings, and to going to the movies and birthday parties. And we hardly ever eat because we are truly hungry and we're trying to, quote unquote, nourish our body. It's an emotional connection. It's very, very closely tied to our behavioral being. So how can fasting benefit some people? And I'm also going to talk about how it can actually hurt some people. It can benefit some people because it's a form of detachment. There's a reason why fasting is found in almost every world religion and practice. They put it in there not because they're trying to reduce body fat or, increase cell autophagy or anything like that. It's because you're detaching from something, not unlike detaching from maybe electronics, right? We could do the same thing with, but maybe in modern societies by detaching from electronics or taking, a couple weeks off of work. We all know what that feels like, and the enlightening effects that can produce in us. So it's just detaching from, oh my God, I'm stressed, I need to eat. Or, oh my gosh, I'm bored, I need to eat. Or, oh, it's noon, time to eat, or whatever, right? You don't do it for a day or two, and you kind of deal with your feelings. You process certain things. You maybe develop different ways of coping with how you feel that in maybe uncomfortable ways or whatever. So that's where the real value comes from with fasting. Is there value, side values in physical health and fat loss? Yes, but more from the behavioral effects. I don't like fasting for fat loss because I think that can contribute to negatives, right? In extreme cases, that can be like anorexia, bulimia. It can contribute to this kind of restrict and overeat model, right? Where I've worked with people who fast and they're like, oh yeah, I don't eat until 4 p.m. And then when you watch them eat at 4 and they have their eating window, it's obviously disordered eating, right? It's like no food and then everything all at once type of deal. So when appropriate, I think fasting can be a great tool. But I really think, deeper than that, I think it's important when we're identifying ways to change the way we eat so that we can improve our health. I think it's very important that we move away from the mechanistic aspects of food, proteins, fats, carbs, calories, for example. Not that that's not important. I think it's important to know what's in food and have a good idea. You got to educate yourself. That's very important because you need that for the next step, which is behavioral. How do I work with and adjust and become aware of behaviors that can lead to better eating habits, right? So to give you an example of that, somebody who in a non-stressful way, so a very relaxed kind of the way they live, somebody who enjoys eating healthy, okay? Somebody who has a healthy relationship with food, meaning for the most part, they eat foods that are good for them physically. But, look who's here, my friend who's visiting. I haven't seen them in a while. We're going to go get some pizza and have some beer, right? That can also be very healthy because we're connecting, but it's balanced, right? Or, yeah, I'll have a cookie, but they don't get into that situation where they eat a whole box of cookies and then afterwards they're on the couch and their stomach hurts and they go, why didn't I stop when it was already starting to hurt my stomach? Why did I keep going, right? Like, imagine that person right there. What do they look like? Yeah, they're relatively lean. They're pretty healthy. They don't deal with obesity, right? Why? What is that? That's the behavioral side. It's not the person that's counting every calorie, every macro. Look, you came from the bodybuilding world. Okay, so I'm going to say this, and I'm sure you'll agree with me. You probably saw more disordered eating in the bodybuilding world than you see in the general population of people that are obese.
Without a doubt. That's why I retired in 2009.
That's right. So, and these are people that count every calorie, count every macro. They even count ounces of water and sodium, all these, just mechanistic aspects of food. It's not a healthy way of eating. There was a study that came out of, I want to say Stanford, that showed that having poor relationships in your life was as bad for your health as smoking, I think it was 10 cigarettes a day. So we know how bad cigarettes are for your life. Having poor relationships in your life is as bad. Now think back to those fitness fanatics, those bodybuilders, right? How many of them have poor relationships because they don't go to birthday parties? They don't go out with their friends. They got to take their food with them everywhere they go. Oh my gosh, 2 hours is coming up. I got to eat, find a place, pull over here. We got, right? So imagine that, right? So you're trading one for another. So I don't advocate for what a lot of the fitness space advocates for, which is, counting things all the time. And that's a very stressful way of eating. It leads to some more dysfunction. I'm a huge advocate of working through and with behaviors. And I'll give you a couple simple examples. We talked about one earlier, avoiding heavily processed foods. I would tell, and by the way, this was stuff I figured out 10 years into my career. So I apologize to all the clients I trained for in the first 10 years of my career because it took me a long time to figure this out. But, I would tell somebody, let's say somebody who's average person. So I'm not dealing with a fitness fanatic, which by the way, makes up less than 1% of the population. We got to remember this as fitness influencers or whatever. When we talk to people, it's like, I'm not talking to me. I'm talking to the average person. But I would tell, this person who's coming in wants to lose 30 pounds. And I would say, you know what, let's do this. I don't want you to try to eat less. I don't want you to count anything. Just avoid heavily processed foods and then go ahead and eat until you're satisfied. And they'd look at me like I was crazy. Like, okay, so just don't eat processed foods, but I can eat as much as I want. I'd say, yeah, let's do that for a couple months and let's just see how you feel. And they would all lose weight. They would all lose weight doing that. Why? Well, I said earlier, it'll result in about 500 or 600 calories less a day. Now, had I told them instead, hey, let's count your calories and let's cut your calories by 500 or 600, the effects, if while they're counting, would have been the same in the weight loss, but it would have been unsustainable. It would have been, it would have not worked with their behaviors, with natural human behavior. One hand, I said, eat as much as you want, and they feel like they're satisfied. The other hand, they're counting and restricting, right? Another example is don't eat while you're distracted. So if you're eating, don't be on your computer, don't be on your phone, don't watch TV, sit down and eat. But go ahead and eat like you normally would. And people think, well, how's that going to help? Well, studies will show you'll consume about 10 to 15% less calories by doing so. So rather than telling you to cut your calories by 10 or 15%, all I'm saying is, hey, let's modify your behavior a little bit in a way that's going to lead to what we're looking for. And it's also a much more sustainable approach. So that's what I mean by behavioral approach to nutrition versus the, count calories and count macros approach.
Yeah, I like that. And, in this day and age, very few of us are present. We're in that sympathetic state when we're eating. We're getting a dopamine rush because we're looking at the screen and we're not really digesting the food that we're eating. Much like if we are in the gym, we need to focus on that mind-muscle connection. Same being present when we're eating. Now, there was something that you mentioned, I believe it was in the book, where you'll sometimes get people, instead of saying, okay, we're going to reduce the calories by this much every single day, sometimes you'll go into like a very low deficit for one day, but maybe then be in an abundance on another day. And you'll do that sporadically throughout the week. Can you tell me the concept behind that and describe it for me?
Yeah, there's a few reasons why I'll do that. The main one is behaviorally, but there's also some potential benefits physiologically that come from it. So when I first start on this process with people, oftentimes I will teach them about macros and calories, and we will track for a certain period of time, just because you have to go from a state of not knowing what you don't know to knowing what you don't know to, okay, now I know kind of what's in food. I know what protein looks like. I know what 20 grams of protein looks like. I know what, so you got to go through that education process. I don't like staying there, definitely not, but sometimes we go through that initially. But what I don't like doing is saying, okay, I'm going to have you eat 2,000 calories every day. Okay. Why? Who the heck eats like that in real life? Nobody eats like that in real life. Sometimes I eat more, sometimes I eat less. I have weekends where I go out with friends, and I have weekends where I'm really busy and I skip a couple meals. It's further away from a sustainable real life model than the undulating aspect, giving someone the feeling of less, giving someone the feeling of more. Also, there are some physiological benefits. There's some studies that show that taking what they call diet breaks, or as bodybuilders used to call it, cheat days, actually preserves more muscle and results in more fat loss, over a certain period of time than being in a consistent calorie deficit, all things being equal. In other words, if at the end of the week, you're at a 4,000 calorie deficit, meaning 4,000 calories less than you've burned for the week, and you take two people in that deficit, same everything, proteins, fats, carbs, one person is consistent with their deficit every day. The other person does this up and down undulation. The up and down undulation tends to result in more muscle kept. So there's also those physiological benefits, but I like the behavioral ones even more. It just mimics real life. It's so weird to think, or so strange to think, that people are going to eat the same thing every day, same macro, same calories, same every single day, and somehow transition to real life with that. Like, the only way to maintain that is if you're an obsessive person with your diet. Otherwise, it ain't going to work. You're going to eventually go off. Who eats that way in real life? Real life looks very different. And so that's why I like to, through the process of transitioning to a sustainable approach, have people eat days of lower calories, higher calories, and so on.
Okay, cool. Now, something else that you mentioned, which is quite common amongst a lot of us, is that, fat spot reduction in regards to fat loss is a myth. However, you'll see more and more of these places that have some sort of cool sculpting or cryo sculpting. And also now with, I don't know how familiar you are with peptides or bioregulating peptides. We have the ipamorelin, tesamorelin, where people believe that you can spot reduce with these modalities as well. What's your view on that, Sal?
Yeah. So spot reduction, or choosing where your body is going to burn body fat from, is largely, okay, a myth. Now I say largely and not completely, because changing your hormone profile and becoming healthier does tend to contribute to a healthier body fat storage pattern. Okay. So what I mean by that is, if you look at, if I were to ask you, for example, what are the typical areas that a man stores body fat? And what are the typical areas that a woman stores body fat? Of course, this is general and there's individual variances, but generally speaking, where, for example, do men tend to store body fat?
Men is definitely going to be around the abdomen, the torso area. Females, lower body.
Yeah, right. And that's representative of genetics, and there's hormones that contribute to that. For example, when a woman's hormones are off, imbalanced, she may store a little more in the midsection than she normally will. When a man stores in a way that's unhealthy and his hormones are off, he may store more in his upper body, maybe his pec area, the back of his arms, and in more extreme cases in his lower body. And you'll start to see more of a non-male pattern of fat storage. So hormones can influence it, but it's not this, except in extreme examples. It's not this huge, like, hey, I want to burn body fat from, my arms to be leaner, so let me, do something that's just going to burn body fat from arms. Or like a woman, like, hey, I want to lose body fat everywhere except for my butt and my boobs. Let's do that, right? It's not going to happen. Your body will largely burn body fat from where you're genetically predisposed to do so. And it's a good rule of thumb to understand that the first place that you store body fat is usually the last place that you'll lose it. So if you have your trouble areas, right? Like, oh man, when I put on 10 pounds, it goes right to my, blank, right? For me, it's my midsection. That's where I'll store it, right? That's the last place you'll lose body fat. So like for me, I store body fat very typically like a male. So if I gain lots of body fat, it goes in my midsection. The last place to gain body fat is my arms and my legs. They tend to stay pretty lean until, unless I get real high. And if I'm real high and I get lean, my arms and legs will get lean before my midsection will. So, a couple rules of thumb. You mentioned peptides, and we'll kind of include hormones in that. That's a very interesting space these days. I think peptides have a lot of promise. I do not think it's a good idea to use peptides without supervision from a hormone specialist and a doctor, because peptides, unlike most supplements, do have a profound effect on your body, or they can, right? You could take a peptide and we will see a rise. For example, you could take, ibutamorin, and you will see a pretty significant rise in growth hormone. Well, that can have some effects on other hormones like insulin, for example. And blood sugar. You want to be monitored by a doctor when you're doing this. Peptides, I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, are in this kind of gray area of regulation. So you can technically go online and buy and administer peptides within yourself by buying them through sites that are selling them for, quote unquote, research purposes. So it's like this gray area. I don't think that's a good idea. These are drugs, if you will, for lack of a better term, that are being researched to be used as pharmaceuticals. I do think they have a lot of promise, but look, I've used them under the supervision of doctors, and I see how they affect. I feel it, but I also see through testing, regular blood testing, how they affect the rest of my body. I can't imagine doing that without, blindly, without supervision. Just like people who go on hormone therapy, you should definitely get monitored, because it's a double-edged sword. Could it improve your health and your quality of life, or even just performance? Yes. Could it also go in the wrong direction? Well, yeah. I mentioned growth hormone secretagogues. Man, if you're predisposed to diabetes, that's a great way to speed that process up. Really high growth hormone can make your how your blood sugar is affected quite significantly. So you got to be very careful. So yeah, I think they're really cool. I don't think they're the answer. I think hormones and peptides are the answer when they're the answer, meaning if you're a man with chronically low testosterone and, changing your lifestyle for the better hasn't really helped your testosterone move into a healthy range, well, then using exogenous testosterone is going to be a game changer for you. It is. If your body's not producing enough thyroid, I mean, that's a game changer. But if you're otherwise healthy and you don't have these issues, they're not going to have the impact on you like changing your lifestyle. I mean, if I took a man whose hormones were otherwise normal, who ate crappy food, didn't exercise, just otherwise had a poor lifestyle, and I injected him with a bunch of testosterone, would he get the same benefits as like exercising properly and eating right? Not even close, right? So I'm very careful when I communicate those things. I think people think, oh, this is the answer, it's a panacea, but it really isn't, unless it's necessary, in which case, yes, it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm glad that you brought that up in regards to the doctor supervision, because I've seen people that have actually taken one of these secretagogues and now they've got thyroid issues. It's downregulated with thyroid, and now they've got to take thyroid medication. So glad that you brought that up. I got two more questions that I'd like to ask you. One of them is in regards to the methionine and glycine ratio. I know we could go down a rabbit hole on this one, but obviously we're an advocate of eating more protein. And you see, a lot of professional athletes or amateur athletes eating a lot of muscle meat, and obviously taking in a lot of methionine. And we know that this can lead with an overconsumption towards the early onset of aging. I'm one of those people that does like to eat a lot of organ meat. It's not as if the Liver King kind of contributed to that. I've always been one of those guys, and I'm very conscious of my methionine to glycine ratio. Is this something that you suggest to people that they should look at that if longevity is one of their priorities?
I know, unless I'm talking to the extreme. So if you look at performance and longevity, so like performance, strength, speed, athletic performance, maximum muscle, getting super shredded so you can be on stage, that is far away from longevity, right? So building muscle, extremely healthy. Doing what is necessary to build the amount of muscle that makes you a pro bodybuilder, not healthy, right? Having cardiovascular fitness and health, healthy. Doing what is necessary to be to compete at the highest levels of ultra marathons, not healthy. Okay, so we have to understand that there's a cross between performance. It's like one of those what are they called, Venn diagrams. There's a crossover when it comes to performance and longevity, but the more extreme the performance, the further away you move from longevity. Like a power lifter, for example, extreme strength, right? First of all, being strong is very healthy. It's connected to longevity. It's, for example, one of the single best metrics that will dictate or that can tell us somebody's all-cause mortality. So if you were to take a person and pick one test to predict their all-cause mortality, one of the best ones is a simple strength test. You do a grip test. It's better than almost any other single metric, including measuring their blood lipids or, their inflammatory markers, all that stuff, right? Just a simple strength test. Okay, we know that strength contributes to longevity. What about power lifters? The strongest humans in the world are strongmen. No, it's extreme now. They've gone so far in that direction that that they've left longevity in the dust. So when you're talking about aging and this consumption of excessive amounts of either protein or certain amino acids, we're talking about the extremes. You're talking about people who are pushing it, and you'll see aging accelerate in anybody that pushes any extreme physical endeavor. You look at professional athletes in their 70s and they can barely move half the time and they're on painkillers and stuff. So that's where we need to be careful. But what we don't want to do, and where we need to be careful, is how we communicate that to the average population, because what ends up happening is we cause a lot of alarm that doesn't need to be there. So like, mTOR, you brought that up earlier, right? Mammalian target rapamycin. This is a signaler of muscle growth. It also can fuel cancer growth. So you see articles that are like, mTOR, you can, give you cancer or make your cancer grow out of control. What raises mTOR? Protein. Lower your protein intake. Okay. Really, context matters. First off, if you have cancer, protein feeds cancer. So does carbohydrate. And in some cases, so do fats. Remember, cancers are cells. Okay. So any growth factor can make cancer grow more, right? Even testosterone and estrogen can make testosterone and estrogen sensitive cancers grow. Does that mean we should shut down testosterone and estrogen to try to not have cancer? No, that'll make you die sooner and reduce your longevity. So mTOR in the healthy context is great. It's anabolic. It builds muscle. It's pro tissue. It's good for you. In the context of cancer, well, yeah, now we got to change things. Like if I had cancer right now, I wouldn't be eating 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. I wouldn't be eating in a bulk to try to build muscle. I would probably fast a lot and eat in a large calorie deficit and eat, maybe essential protein and probably no carbohydrates, trying to starve the cancer, for example. So that's why we got to be careful with these conversations. For example, branched chain amino acids. Branched chain amino acids are 3 amino acids that are essential, meaning you need to consume them. And they contribute to recovery, muscle growth, performance, all these different things. Well, that's great. And that's true. Well, what happens if I consume tons and tons and tons? What if I read this and I'm like, oh, branched amino acids, they build muscle. I'm going to drink them all day long. I'm just going to put them in my jug of water. And not only am I eating tons of protein, but now I'm going to consume just tons and tons of branched amino acids. Well, now you're going to cause problems. Probably depression. It can cause the reduction of dopamine, for example, in the brain, and serotonin. So context matters. So no, I don't communicate that to the average person. But if I'm talking to, somebody that's eating, 1.5 grams of protein per pound of body weight or 2 grams of protein per body weight, and they're extremely muscular and shredded and they're really pushing their bodies to limits, then I'll say, hey, look, we got to maybe look at some of the stuff if you care at all, because you probably don't, because you just want to maximize, every aspect of your performance.
Yeah, I'm one of those rarities where I do like to train hard. I like to train to the extreme. You mentioned ultramarathon before. I've done ultramarathon, do Ironman, triathlon. So yeah, I understand that I'm pushing my body to the extreme, and it's not probably good for my longevity. So I'm trying to kind of maximize those deficiencies in my life so I can kind of meet myself halfway, I guess, to a certain degree.
Let me comment on that, Kris, because I do want to be clear. Okay. I think quality of life is extremely important. I do the same thing, Kris. Like, I just worked out yesterday. I'm 43 years old. Okay. I've been working out for almost 30 years. Okay. And I was at the gym deadlifting, and I started going heavier in the weight. And I said, hey, let's pull 550 on the ground, which is pretty heavy for me. Now, I didn't hurt myself, but probably, why am I doing this? I don't need to. It's not like I'm going to compete in a powerlifting club. Like, why? Because I enjoy it. It's my quality of life. Same reason why I'll smoke a joint sometimes, or have a glass of whiskey with my friends. Like, is this contributing to my longevity? I mean, probably not. Is it contributing to my quality of life? Yeah. Yeah. It improves my quality. Is it a balance? Yeah, it's definitely a balance. And look, I'm not going to tell the person who generally finds a tremendous quality of life and meaning in running 100 miles in competitions. I'm not going to sit them down and be like, you're an idiot, you're not going to live as long or whatever. Like, it's just, they enjoy doing it. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong. Now, of course, there could be dysfunction in other ways, but look, there's a quality of life here as well. And I'll even make this argument. Does quality of life also contribute to longevity? It does. I think it does. I think this is why you see studies, by the way, because look at the studies on alcohol. Some of them are very interesting and conflicting, right? We got studies that show, you mentioned Sardinia earlier. So, people in Sardinia men in particular, live a long time. They drink wine every day, alcohol every single day. Now, there's also studies that show that any amount of alcohol is bad for your health. Any amount contributes to negative effects in the body. Well, how is this possible that these people in Sardinia who drink a glass of wine every day are living, these men are living to 100 at rates that we don't see anywhere else in the world? Well, I don't know. Maybe the glass of wine is at dinner with their family. It relaxes them, puts them in a different, slightly, different state of consciousness, improves their quality of life. And that contributes to longevity. So the longevity conversation is so much. There's definitely clear examples of things that might not make you live as long and things that'll make you live longer. But there's a lot in the middle that is intersecting and gray, and quality of life is a part of that. So, I think if you have balance and you do things for the right reasons, I mean, having a glass of wine or smoking a joint here or there, or, enjoying a pizza going to make you live less long or longer? Depends. I think it depends.
Yeah, it definitely depends on the individual. That person, like you said, in Sardinia is probably having that glass of wine to enjoy life. And you've got some people around the world that are having that glass of wine to forget life.
Yes.
So you've got a different kind of seesaw effect there. I've got another question for you. One more, Sal, is, of course, there's a lot of people out there that know what to do. They know they've got to move, they've got to eat better. However, maybe they've survived cancer twice, but they're still obese. Yeah. And they just cannot get it around their heads that they should say no to the pizza. They shouldn't order online the fast food. And they know they need to get outside and move, but there's something stopping them. Do you have any suggestions for those listeners out there that may be experiencing that?
Oh yeah. I mean, and by the way, I want to be very empathetic and clear here, because obesity is a very visible symptom of maybe dysfunction. Other dysfunctions aren't so visible. It's hard to pick out the gambler, the guy who gambles too much, or the sex addict, or the drug addict, or the workaholic. So I think people who are obese get targeted a bit more just because it's clear. It's very obvious and clear. But I mean, I have things that I do that I could easily look back and be like, why do I do that? Like, it's obvious that that's not helping me. Like, why do I continue to do that? Well, there's really only two clear ways to change fundamental behaviors, and I say fundamental because how we eat is really a part of who we are. It really is. We talked about this earlier in this particular podcast, but it's so connected to our emotions and how we connect to people in our culture that it really is a part of, kind of who we are, right? There's really only two ways to change ourselves in fundamental ways. One is an epiphany, which is very rare. So you mentioned people who've had cancer, have heart attacks. Sometimes that does work. Sometimes someone has a scare, they overdose on drugs, and they wake up in the hospital room and they're surrounded by their kids and their wife, and they're like, what am I doing? And that's it. They change. From then on, they stop, right? So that's the epiphany. Don't rely on that. Don't bet on that. It's unpredictable at best and rare. It's absolutely rare, right? So let's look at the other way that people can change how they are, or change their behaviors in fundamental ways. Slow. It's a slow growth journey and learning process. Okay, so let's be more specific. What does that look like? I'll give you some some kind of more specific applications. Take yourself and ask yourself what it is you'd like to change. So you could say, I need to improve my health. I'm overweight and my blood pressure is high, so I need to change that. Okay, so we know that. Lose some weight, improve my blood pressure. Then look at your life and find something that you can change that is both realistic forever. That's the context. Realistic forever. Okay. But also somewhat challenging. It's got to be both. Okay. So why realistic forever? Because any change you make that's not realistic forever is not going to stick. That's a fact. 100%. You're going to fail 100% if you pick something that's not realistic forever. And I say forever because often when people are in the state of, I need to change something, they're in a motivated state of mind. It's like, okay, that's it. I got to do something. And then you're motivated. The decisions you make when you're motivated, or the things you can stick to or feel like you can stick to when you're motivated, are not the things that you can stick to when you're not motivated. We've all done this, right? I've done this with business. Like, oh, that's it. I'm going to hit these targets in 3 weeks. And then, the motivation wanes, like, oh my gosh, it's too much. I don't know if I can continue doing this. Right. So you have to say forever, and you have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, when I'm not motivated, when I'm not feeling up to it, when I'm tired or whatever, is this realistic forever? Now, the challenging part, why that? It has to have meaning. It has to have some meaning. Meaning comes from challenge. There is no challenge. There is no meaning in things that don't challenge us. It means nothing. Means nothing at all if it's easy and piece of cake. So it's got to be those two things. So do that. And whatever falls in that category, I don't care what it is. I don't care how little of a step it is. It doesn't matter. Whatever it is, start there and then stick to that until it feels like a part of your habits and behaviors. So it can literally be, and I've done this with clients. We'll sit down and we'll start deducing. And almost always, by the way, they give me something that's unrealistic forever. So, all right, I'm gonna eliminate sugar. I say, all right, well, hold on. Do you think you could do that for the next, 30 years? Like, oh, well, I don't know. Like, okay, maybe not. So, okay, let's start with something that is realistic. So they'll say, okay, I'm going to walk for 5 minutes after breakfast. Okay. Do you think that's realistic forever? Yes. Do you think though that's going to be a little challenging? Yeah, it's gonna be a little challenging. It's still, I'm not doing it now, so there's gonna be some challenges. Okay, cool. We'll start there. And then they'll say, all right, when do I take the next step? When that one is part of your lifestyle and your behavior. When it gets to the part where it's just part of what you do and it's like, whatever, then let's ask that question again. Here's what it looks like. It's a slow start, but then it starts to snowball. So what happens is you take that first step, very small. It's usually something like, I'm going to drink an extra glass of water, or I'm going to go to bed 15 minutes early, or I'm going to, a 5-minute walk, twice a week or something small. And then the next step tends to be a little bit bigger, because what we start to develop and build is a new skill, or a skill known as discipline. And it is a skill. People who are very disciplined, by the way, they can take bigger steps than people who have low discipline skills. And it carries over. So if you talk to somebody who's, for example, extremely disciplined and skilled, and has the skill of discipline in, let's say, entrepreneurship. Look at someone who's very successful with building businesses. What you'll tend to find is that discipline carries over into some other aspects of their life. They tend to be more consistent with exercise, or they tend to have practices like meditating or, whatever that may not be directly connected to the thing that they're most disciplined with. So it is a skill that you develop. So the first step's small. The first step, you stick to it for a while. Then the next step tends to be a little bit bigger, because you're starting to develop that skill of discipline. You're starting to develop that confidence. And then you take that step. So maybe the next step is, okay, well, I did 5 minutes after breakfast. I'm going to do 15 minutes now after breakfast and lunch. And I feel like that's both realistic, but also somewhat challenging. And then you do that for a while. And then before you know it, these steps get bigger and bigger. And over time, you develop the skill of discipline and you change your behaviors. Now, this is the only realistic, successful, sustainable approach I've ever found in my practice as a trainer or coach over the last, 2 decades. There's nothing else that I've ever done that works at nearly this particular way. It's not 100%. People still fail, but it's way better than the 100% fail rate that people tend to do, which is the I'm motivated, do everything all at once type of approach and radically change my life all at once. I'm going no carb. I'm going to do this no carb diet, or that's it. I'm going vegan. It's like, okay, I'll see you in 3 months when you completely fall off. And again, that's just human behavior. But I do want to say this too, because some people get impatient. They're like, oh, but I want to lose the weight now. It's faster than you think. It's also your likelihood of it being permanent is much higher. And I'll end that part with this story. I had a client years ago. I love talking about her because it was such a wonderful illustration of what we're talking about. Her name was Kelly, and she came to me as a referral from one of my doctor clients. So earlier I said how I trained a lot of doctors at one point. Well, I had this one doctor that I trained that was she was a general surgeon, but one of her specialties was cancer. And this particular individual had cancer a few times, luckily avoided major surgeries. And this doctor client of mine who I'd worked with as a client for years just pestered her. You got to go see this guy, Sal. You got to see this trainer. And she's like, I hate working out. I hate gyms. I hate doing that kind of stuff. Finally, she convinced her to come see me. So she walks in, Kelly, and she'd obviously been pestered and she obviously didn't want to be there. And she sits down in front of me. First words out of her mouth: I'm working out once a week with you, max. I'm not doing anything on my own. Okay. So before we get on with this, that's just the bottom line. And I said, okay, that's where we'll start. Once a week with me, and I'm not going to ask you to do anything else. And she was surprised that I said that, but I knew at this point, experience, because younger me would have blown her out, but experienced me knew the only chance I have with this woman is that 1 day a week. And I think if we do this right, she's going to eventually start to make some changes. That's exactly what happened. She trained with me once a week. And look, once a week's better than 0 days a week. And she got stronger. Look, you work out once a week properly, even if it's for 30 minutes versus nothing, you're going to get stronger. You're going to feel and see some changes. And that's what she did. She started getting stronger. And I made sure to point things out. Wow, you did 2 more reps. Look, you're doing an exercise you couldn't do before. Wow, your back doesn't hurt anymore. And, when she came in, we had great conversation. I made sure that was a enjoyable experience for her, because this is a new thing I'm trying to implement in her life. And she did this for, I want to say, 1.5 years. So for a full 1.5 years, she did nothing but see me once a week. Okay. Which is almost, for fitness enthusiasts, they're like, oh, once a week, what's that going to do? Well, what it did is it got her a little stronger. She felt a little better. But I remember 1.5 years into it, it was hilarious because I predicted this. I'm like, watch, I know eventually she's going to want more. And she did. She came in and she goes, hey, do you have another day open in your schedule? Absolutely, Kelly, let's do that. And so we did another day a week. And we did that for another, I think it was like another 4 months. So twice a week for 4 months. And then she came to me and she goes, so remember, 1.5 years, now we're 4 months. Then she came to me and she said, is there any exercises I could do at home? She was a professor. So she's like, when I'm looking at papers and stuff, is there some stuff I can do on the floor? Oh yeah, absolutely. Here's 3 movements you could practice whenever you have time. So then we did that. 2 months later, she comes to me and she says, I'm thinking about cutting my sugar down a little bit. I think I eat too much sugar. Okay. Well, over the course of 3 years, this woman went from, I'm only working out once a week, don't tell me what to do, to getting certified as a trainer, not because she became a trainer, because she was so interested in it, to watching her food intake. She got into organic food, started, working out on her own, going on hikes. And this became a big part of her life. Now, I haven't trained this woman for probably 7 years, still in contact with her. She's still consistent. Now, had she come to me and I did, what young, inexperienced trainers often do, or what I would have done early on, and said, wow, once a week's not enough. You got to do more. And then, because I can be very convincing and charismatic, maybe sell her on the fact that she could work out with me 3 days a week and try and motivate her into this, state of mind. She would have quit after 3, 4, 5 months, and I would have never seen her again. She would have been in one of those statistics. So that's just a story to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. So if you want permanent, forever success, you got to do it this way. Don't do it all at once. I'm motivated and hyped and make these huge changes approach, because you'll fail. You'll fail every time that way.
Yeah, I love that story. That's phenomenal. We see that at gyms in January, don't we? The best intentions, the discipline, which all fails come February. And instead of feeding somebody, or making sudden moves, the birds are going to fly away. It's got to be those little moves that I guess is going to help with neural pathways until it becomes a healthy habit. And then you just want to compact that, I guess. But that's an awesome story. Now, Sal, thank you ever so much for your time. I did have a lot more questions here, but they are all answered in this book. So where can people find this book, which is phenomenal? By the way, everybody that keeps reaching out and says, hey, what's a good book that you've read lately? This is the one. So where can they find it, and where can people find you, Sal?
Thank you. The resistancetrainingrevolution.com, or anywhere they sell books. So Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Target, or your local bookstore should have it. I wrote the book very much for the average person to try to communicate some of what I said here, but much more on how to get, sustainable, permanent results with minimal time, because I know that that's realistic for most people. And I also wrote it for coaches and trainers, kind of arm them how to communicate better to their clients and train people in ways that will lead to more long-term success. And if you want to find me, the best way is on my podcast, Mind Pump, which you can find on any podcast platform, or on YouTube, Mind Pump Podcast. And then you can find me on Twitter at Mind Pump Sal.
Thank you. And yeah, by all means, please do check out the Mind Pump podcast. I've been listening to that for several years myself. So thank you very much for your time, Sal. Really, really do appreciate it. And to everybody else listening, this is the Kris Gethin podcast, and we are out.
And remember to go shopping for my G-Stack. Go to www.visualchemistryskin.com. Thank you ever so much for listening. My name is Kris Gethin, and I am out.